Hello students, welcome to the academia. Today our topic is renin angiotensin aldosterone system, that is RAAS. In our previous video regarding the regulation of blood pressure, I have gone through the short-term regulations through the baroreceptors and chemoreceptors. Now today I discuss the long-term regulation of blood pressure, which is via this renal fluid mechanism, renin angiotensin system and aldosterone system. Now what is this? So this is basically a hormone system, and it is a part of the long-term regulation of blood pressure. This system mainly comprised of the three hormones, which is number 1 renin, number 2 angiotensin 2 and number 3 is aldosterone. Now one by one I will discuss what about their sources, how they act to the regulation of blood pressure. So the RAAS, the renin release. First we move to the release of renin. So what is renin? Where from it released actually? So the renin is the first stage of the RAAS is the release of the enzyme renin. So where from it is released? So it released from the renal JG apparatus. What is the full form? That is juxta apparatus. So this juxtaglomerular apparatus having some granular cells which help in the release of the renin. So how the renin is secreted and why the renin is secreted? Basically the JG apparatus secrete renin in response to some of the factors. What is the factors? The factors are reduced sodium delivery to the distal convoluted tubule detected by the macular denser cells. So what are the factors? So DCT is the distal convoluted tubule. In the structure of nephron, we found after glomerulus and Bowman capsule there is PCT, that is the proximal convoluted tubule, then the Henle's loop, and then the distal convoluted tubule, and then collecting duct. So if there is reduced sodium delivery to the distal convoluted tubule, it is sensed by the macular denser cells. So it is one response. Moving to the others. Next, the reduced perfusion pressure in the kidney, which is also detected by baroreceptors, and the sympathetic stimulation of juxtaglomerular apparatus by the beta 1 adrenoreceptors. So these are the actually the things in which responses there is JJ apparatus which release the renin. This renin release is inhibited by the atrial natriuretic peptide, that is the ANP. So which one is the inhibitor? The inhibitor is ANP, that is atrial peptide. So now after the renin production, we see the production of angiotensin 2. So in the diagram below, can see the production of the angiotensin 2. Angiotensinogen is a precursor protein which is produced in the liver and cleaved by the renin to form angiotensin 1. This angiotensin 1 is then converted to angiotensin 2 by one enzyme, that is ACE, angiotensin converting enzyme. This conversion mainly occurs in the lung, where the ACE is produced by vascular endothelial cells. The binding of angiotensin 2. Angiotensin 2 exerts its action by binding to various receptors throughout the body, and it binds to one of two G protein coupled receptors, the AT1 and AT2 receptors. Most actions occur via the AT1 receptor. So in the diagram can see also the factors that stimulate the renin secretion as well, which I have already discussed. And then the actions of angiotensin 2, that how it induce kidney, posterior pituitary, vascular smooth muscle, hypothalamus and adrenal cortex. So its action on the kidney, that is, it constricts the glomerular efferent arteriole and increases Na plus H plus exchanger activity. So in the glomerulus there are afferent arteriole and efferent arteriole. So it actually constrict the efferent arteriole. In the posterior pituitary, it helps in the secretion of ADH, that is vasopressin. The two neurohormones which secreted from posterior pituitary, one is oxytocin and another is ADH. So it helps in the ADH secretion. Next, the vascular smooth muscle, it causes the hypertension, and the hypothalamus, which stimulate the thrust, it stimulates the thrust center, and in the adrenal cortex it helps in the aldosterone secretion. The aldosterone which actually help generally what aldosterone do, the aldosterone basically act on the collecting tubule. So now we see that we know how angiotensin 2 is produced by the RAAS. Let's review the effects of angiotensin 2 has on the body. So this is the thing. Understanding the angiotensin 2 will help us to figure out how the ARBs work actually. So ARB means, what is ARB? That is angiotensin 2 receptor blocker. So they are called ARBs. Now, angiotensin 2 has several mechanisms to increase the blood pressure. Number one, vasoconstriction. Then sodium water reabsorption. Then the aldosterone release. ADH release. And the adrenal medulla stimulation. So by knowing this, first of all, here is a quick reminder of the blood pressure equation. We know that the BP equals cardiac output into systemic vascular resistance. And cardiac output means heart rate into stroke volume. So we get the BP equal to heart rate into stroke volume into systemic vascular resistance. So one by one can see how the mechanism takes place. First, vasoconstriction. So angiotensin 2 is a potent vasoconstrictor. There is angiotensin 2 receptors located on the smooth muscle cell of the blood vessel. So in the smooth muscle cell of the blood vessel, the angiotensin 2 receptors are present. There are two types of angiotensin 2 receptors. That is type 1, AT1, and type 2, that is AT2. So these are the angiotensin 2 receptors which are present on the smooth muscles. It is mainly type 1 we are referring to as we discuss the angiotensin 2 receptors. When angiotensin 2 binds to these receptors, it causes vascular smooth muscle contraction. Vascular smooth muscle contraction leads to increased vasoconstriction. If we reduce the diameter of a vessel, then systemic vascular resistance increases. And the systemic vascular resistance, that is SVR, is also known as total peripheral resistance. So there is resistance of the systemic vascular resistance, which is also known as the total peripheral resistance or the total peripheral resistance. Okay. So as we can see from the blood pressure equation above, increasing SVR. So if the SVR is increased, it will increase the blood pressure. So from the equation it is clear that if the SVR is increased, then there is increase in the blood pressure. So this is one of the way. So angiotensin 2 is a potent vasoconstrictor. It binds to the angiotensin 2 receptors on the blood vessels and leading to the smooth muscle contraction. Now the second one. So this one we discuss. Now the sodium water reabsorption. Angiotensin 2 also affects the kidneys. First, it can directly stimulate sodium and water reabsorption at the proximal tubule of the nephron. In the nephron, after the glomerulus and Bowman capsule, the tubular part starts with PCT, that is the proximal convoluted tubule. If it reabsorbs sodium and water from the kidney back into the bloodstream, then the blood volume will increase. An increase in the blood volume will increase the stroke volume, which will increase the cardiac output. So here again, if the stroke volume increases, there is increase in the cardiac output, as we can see in the equation, and increase in the stroke volume will also increase the blood pressure. So that was true in case of the previous one, and now for this. So there is sodium and water reabsorption in the PCT of the nephron. So it occurred actually in the PCT of the nephron, and it increases the blood volume, it increases the stroke volume, cardiac output and blood pressure as well. So this is the way. Next, the aldosterone release. So here the aldosterone is released from the adrenal cortex. Angiotensin 2 stimulate the release of aldosterone from the adrenal cortex. So number one is the smooth muscle contraction, the action of angiotensin 2. Number two is the sodium and water reabsorption by the angiotensin 2. Next, the aldosterone release by the angiotensin 2. Aldosterone is a hormone that primarily acts on the distal tubule of the nephron. So it basically acts on the DCT, that is the distal convoluted tubule, to increase the sodium and water reabsorption. This will then have the same downstream effects of increasing blood volume, stroke volume and blood pressure that we already see. Aldosterone also increases the potassium excretion in the urine, which will become important when we talk about the side effects of the contraindications of ARBs. in the blockers. Moving to the ADH, that is how the angiotensin help in the ADH secretion as well as it help in the BP increase. So angiotensin to stimulate the release of ADH from posterior part of the pituitary. So the pituitary posterior part, that is the release of ADH, which is also known as vasopressin. ADH act on the collecting duct. So where it acts? It acts on basically the collecting tubule of kidney. Of the nephron to facilitate the water reabsorption. So what is the work of ADH? It is called the antidiuretic hormone. It helps on the reabsorption of water. As we see above, the water reabsorption will increase the blood volume. If the water is retained, then blood volume increases, which will increase the stroke volume and which will increase the blood pressure again. So this is the way. There are also vasopressin or ADH receptors located on the smooth muscle cell of the blood vessels. Here also some of the ADH receptors also located. Activation of these receptors by ADH will cause vascular smooth muscle contraction. So in this way also again there is regulation of BP. So ADH also some receptors are present on the blood vessels, and as the angiotensin receptors are present on the blood vessel which help in this process, as well as the ADH also have some receptors on the blood vessels. So as we saw above, the vascular smooth muscle contraction leads to increased vasoconstriction, increased SVR and increased blood pressure. So this thing again happen. Next, the adrenal medulla stimulation. The sympathetic nervous system can help to activate the RAAS by stimulating the JG cell to release renin. Angiotensin 2 can then go back and affect the sympathetic nervous system by augmenting the sympathetic outflow centrally. Angiotensin 2 can also stimulate the adrenal medulla to secrete epinephrine or adrenaline and norepinephrine or noradrenaline, which are the main catecholamines of the sympathetic nervous system. So we can see how the effects of angiotensin 2 connected together and how angiotensin 2 has multiple mechanisms to increase the blood pressure. So this is the way how the angiotensin 2 works. So this is the overall way how the renin angiotensin aldosterone system, that is RAAS, work and help as a long-term regulation in the BP control. So hope you people can understand. If you have any query regarding this long-term regulation of blood pressure, this system, overall RAAS mechanism, you can ask or can comment in the comment box. Thank you so much.